The story begins by introducing Fernan, heir to House Pellenberg, considered the family closest to the Armian Empire. He was a student at the Imperial Academy of Magic, a powerful and highly respected institution. His family possessed impressive wealth, and Fernan was known for an even more remarkable hunger for money. His greed was so great that no one could compare to him. Because of this, people began calling him the Money Hunter. The young man spent his days supervising reports on the trade managed by his house. It was common for him to severely criticize those who didn't meet his expectations. To him, nothing in the world was more valuable than money. It was an ordinary day in Fernan's life, but everyone says tragedy usually strikes when least expected. In one of those meetings, Fernan questioned one of his employees about when he would finally do work worthy of the salary he was paid. The man replied that he had already improved a lot. Fernan agreed that his salary was better than before, but said there was still a long way to go for him to be truly satisfied. However, on an unexpectedly clear and sunny day, with no clouds or sign of rain, lightning struck Fernan directly. At the moment he lost consciousness from the shock, a strange soul seized the opportunity to enter his body. This soul seemed confused and didn't really understand what was happening, but the one who should have been most lost was Fernan, who, even while unconscious, noticed the presence of the intruder. He instinctively focused what little mana he had left to expel the strange soul. The intruder complained of pain and didn't understand what was going on. Despite being easily defeated, part of that soul ended up being absorbed by Fernan's body. It was at that moment that something very strange happened to him. Fernan screamed in pain, his eyes turned completely white, and for a few seconds he didn't understand anything. When he regained his senses, he opened his eyes slowly and tried to get up. A man nearby asked if he was okay. Meanwhile, Fernan noticed something much more disturbing. He began to see in front of him strange text, as if they were prophecies announcing the end of the world. The words spoke of the return of the 72 demons that would bring chaos to the world. Among these prophecies, he read his own name, Fernan Pellenberg, heir to the ducal title of House Pellenberg. They said he would be expelled from his house for some reason, lose all his money, and end up homeless. That vision deeply frightened him. He kept trying to understand why he would be expelled from his own house, since it made no sense to him. What terrified him the most wasn't just being expelled, but the idea of losing all his fortune. That thought filled him with anger and fear. From that day on, Fernan did everything he could to find out what that strange soul inside him was. He spent hours thinking about how it had happened and what he could do to solve the problem. At the academy, he wore a bored and tired expression, trying to hide the confusion he felt. He was always looking for answers about the soul that had invaded his body. When the teacher ended the class and dismissed the students, Fernan remained lost in thought, unable to understand why he had received those memories and visions. In the end, even without discovering anything concrete about the intruder, he was certain of one thing: the prophecies were true. Every one of them so far had proven 100% accurate. For that reason, he began to use these prophecies to his advantage, gaining even more money, which was what he valued most. However, even as he became richer, Fernan couldn't feel happy. He knew that if the prophecies kept being right, it meant his house's downfall was also approaching. Because of this, he needed to be absolutely certain that those prophecies were really true. The scene shifts to Fernan talking with an older man who took care of him. The man asked how classes had been that day, and Fernan, still a little shaken, replied that they had been the same as always, nothing new. The man suggested they have some coffee for a while, and Fernan agreed. While they were drinking, Fernan picked up a newspaper that was on the table. The man took the opportunity to ask if he had been feeling unwell lately. Fernan denied it, but wanted to know why he thought that. The man explained that he seemed much more worried about certain things than usual. Fernan asked since when he had been thinking that, and the man answered that he had noticed it since about the middle of the previous year. He said that sometimes Fernan would get distracted for a long time, and at other times he would make impulsive decisions even though he was normally so careful and meticulous. He asked if Fernan was sure he wasn't experiencing any side effects after being struck by that lightning. Fernan replied that, despite some strange decisions, it had ended up bringing him great fortune in the end. Then he picked up a paper with news about Aint Armian, which said he would be the successor to the former emperor. On the same paper, it said he was one of the new academy students. Fernan was surprised to confirm that Aint Armian had really entered the academy. Then he suddenly stood up, saying he needed to go south for a while, and ran out without giving further explanations, leaving the man completely confused. The narration explains that the Imperial Academy was located on an island called Bardian, within the territory of the Armian Empire. Much of the environment there was artificially maintained by magic. The southern part of the island was basically a swamp. Fernan thought this was his chance to confirm if the prophecies were really true. He remembered clearly three things that had been engraved in his mind since the day he saw those visions. The first was that he would be expelled from his house. The second was that in the future he would end up bankrupt. And the third was that he would be completely homeless. These predictions left him furious. He simply refused to accept that something like that could happen. But beyond the parts that left him desperate, other things had also caught his attention in the prophecies. One of them said that in the future the 72 demons King Kolomo had summoned 1,000 years ago would rise again. Another said that Aint Armian would save the world from these demons. Fernan reflected on who this boy was. He knew that in the Empire everyone recognized the name Armian, since he was a direct descendant of the founding emperor Carlinos Armian, the man who had established the Armian Empire together with 5 neighboring kingdoms. 1,000 years had passed since then, and the imperial family had lost much of its power. The prophecy mentioned no one but Aint Armian as the main character of this part of the story. It said that after completing his entrance exams, he would go directly to the southern swamps instead of returning home. The reason for joining the academy would be to search for the map that the founding emperor had left behind. Everything that happened to him was described in detail, like a novel. Fernan thought that watching how Aint Armian acted according to the prophecy was the best way to find out if those predictions were really true. He knew that Aint Armian wasn't just a protagonist of a grand prophecy, but also someone directly tied to the terrible fate awaiting him. It would be him, in the future, who would deliver the expulsion papers that would make Fernan lose everything. What bothered him most was not understanding why Aint Armian hated him so much. Even reading the prophecies, he couldn't discover the reason. Some parts were too blurry and hard to decipher, so he could only grasp the general flow of events. There were no clear details about their relationship. The official reason for his future expulsion would be working with demons, but that made no sense at all to him. He couldn't imagine how or why he would ever do something like that. Already in the southern swamps, Fernan dismounted his horse, convinced that Aint Armian had to be around. He knew that Aint was looking for a hidden dungeon in that region. According to the prophecies, the founding emperor had hidden there a sword that contained the ego of the empire's first royal knight, Gardener Alphen Parson. If the prophecies were correct, Aint Armian was the perfect candidate to save the world, and Fernan needed to be sure of that before it was too late. Fernan knew that Aint Armian was exactly the hero everyone was waiting for. Even so, he thought to himself that he would have killed that boy already if his role weren't so important. He couldn't believe that bastard would have the nerve to be the one responsible for bankrupting him in the future. While thinking about this, Fernan suddenly smelled something strange, the scent of blood. He remembered a part of the prophecies that said Aint would get hurt on the way to the dungeon, and that made a lot of sense now. Although destined to be a hero, Aint was still very young and inexperienced. Fernan guessed that a creature like a crooker would be too big of a challenge for him. Following the trail of blood on the ground, Fernan wondered if this was really the entrance to the dungeon. Everything was happening exactly as the prophecies had said so far. He was sure Aint was inside. But at that moment, Fernan was startled and questioned what the hell he was even doing there. He wondered if he hadn't arrived too early. Then he found Aint injured at the entrance and told him that new students weren't allowed to be in that place. Aint asked if Fernan knew him. Fernan shot back, saying there wasn't anyone in the Empire who didn't know him. Aint wanted to know who he was and was surprised to hear the name Fernan, immediately recognizing Fernan Pellenberg. This made Aint visibly nervous, but Fernan remarked that he was being too formal, since he was only a year older than him. Fernan noticed that Aint was hurt and asked if he had run into a lizardman, but Aint explained that he'd been wounded by a crooker. Fernan commented that finding a crooker was pretty rare and said the boy had been very unlucky. Then Fernan tossed him a vial, saying it was a high-quality potion, much better than 10 ordinary ones. Aint, startled, refused, explaining that he didn't have enough money to pay for something so valuable. But Fernan replied that he didn't need any money since it was the only thing he had in abundance. He remarked that although Aint's family no longer had the power it once did, he carried in his veins the blood of the founding emperor and would probably grow into a good man in the future. To Fernan, that potion was just an investment. Meanwhile, Aint thought that Fernan Pellenberg didn't seem like the money-crazed maniac everyone claimed. He might actually be a much better person than he'd imagined. Grateful, Aint thanked him for the kindness. But Fernan, with a cold and calculating look, reminded himself how expensive that potion had been. If it weren't for the prophecies, he would never have done something like that. To him, Aint should consider himself very lucky. In the past, every student caught trespassing on private property was arrested and severely punished. He was being very generous by letting Aint go without consequences. Aint thanked him again, promising he would repay him someday. After that, Fernan hid and began observing what Aint would do next. He noticed that the boy, even though he was injured, didn't drink the potion. Instead, he went straight into the dungeon. After a while, Fernan also entered behind him. Although he had doubted it a bit, he saw with his own eyes that there really was a dungeon there. As he crossed the entrance, he noticed that nothing happened, which made him suspect that the dungeon wasn't fully activated yet. He thought it was strange not to feel any trace of mana, even though the magical lanterns lit the path. He realized that these lanterns were drawing mana from the environment, indicating they were permanent magical lanterns. He wondered how Aint could have left something so valuable behind, or maybe he didn't even know their worth. To Fernan, that boy seemed very naive and even a bit stupid, very different from the grand figure the prophecies promised. He questioned if it was right to leave the world's future in the hands of someone like that. The prophecy said that Aint would enter the dungeon badly wounded. He really was in bad shape, nearly collapsing at the entrance, swallowing his sobs as his whole body hurt. Aint drank all the ordinary potions he had, but the wounds were too severe for them to work. Even so, he kept moving forward. Instinctively, he was guided to the place he was supposed to reach, an altar with a gigantic sword. At first glance, the sword didn't look special at all, but Aint couldn't take his eyes off it. It felt like the blade was calling to him, speaking directly to his mind and soul. When Aint finally grasped that sword, an intense light filled the entire dungeon. As soon as he opened his eyes, he realized he was no longer in that dark place. Instead, he found himself in an alley near the Imperial Academy. Fernan noticed there was still a faint trace of magic in the air, indicating that the sword must have been transported there. However, Aint had vanished without leaving any trace. All of this confirmed that the ancient prophecies were true. According to them, everything Fernan had gained in the name of House Pellenberg would no longer belong to him, and he should never appear before Aint again. The prophecy said this was the greatest mercy Aint could offer him. When Fernan started thinking about the future, he grew desperate at the thought that he really could lose everything and end up in ruin. The idea of bankruptcy left him deeply angry. At that point, the narrator explains that Aint, recognized by the Book of Prophecy, was the hero destined to protect the world from demons, but would also be the cause of Fernan's downfall. Even so, Fernan knew that Aint was a young man on the rise. He considered the idea of approaching him immediately and showing loyalty, almost like a dog wagging its tail for its master. However, the prophecy also described Aint as someone completely different from him. Aint was the type of person who valued honor more than any material reward. If approached the wrong way, he might think Fernan was trying to buy him, seeing him as a shameless man. That could spell Fernan's end. For that reason, he wondered how he could speak with Aint without arousing suspicion. Even considering all the possibilities, it was clear to him that it would be very difficult in that situation. While Fernan was lost in these thoughts, a man approached and asked what he found so difficult. It was his butler, Hyde. Fernan then asked him to imagine a situation similar to a promising guild that always grew when someone invested in it. He wanted to know what Hyde would do in such a case. Hyde replied that he would invest without hesitation. Fernan asked if he wouldn't care about the guild's style or reputation being completely different from his own. Hyde answered that it was no problem at all, since money matched any style. Surprised, Fernan admitted to himself that the butler was right. It was easy to get distracted with talk of demons and risky bets, but in the end, it was always about investing, taking risks, and seeking big returns. Different personalities were trivial compared to such high profits. Even so, he knew he needed more specific information about Aint. He decided he would get to know him personally. Hyde then asked whom he wanted to meet and if it was an important guest, but before he realized it, Fernan had already walked away without answering. The narration then shifts to the Imperial Academy. There, the students' dormitories were organized according to their entrance exam ranking. The top 10 went to the Hall of Revidos, those in 11th to 30th place to the Hall of Bless, and those ranked below that were sent to the Hall of Debes, considered the lowest tier. In this context, a spirit appeared in the form of a small furious flame. This fire was the ego of Gardner, the spirit that resided within the sword. He was outraged to see a descendant of Armian studying at the Armian Academy but living in the Hall of Debes instead of Bless or Revidos. To him, that was unacceptable. If the old emperor were alive, he would have risen from the grave to strangle him like a demon. Aint asked why the spirit was suddenly talking about demons. The spirit explained that if it weren't for the demon's interference, none of this would have happened. Aint admitted he couldn't avoid it since he was in that hall precisely because he was weak. Gardner grew even angrier, saying it was impossible to believe a descendant of Armian could be weak. Aint then explained that it was all the result of the first emperor's choices. He recalled that the first emperor had abolished hereditary imperial succession and turned the government into an electoral system among 7 electoral houses. He had also donated almost all of House Armian's lands and wealth to the empire about 100 years ago. Because of this, the throne had passed to other electoral houses, and the donated lands no longer belonged to his family. That was the reason for House Armian's decline. Part of the old secret sword techniques was lost, and although Aint was still technically a prince, he couldn't even train properly with his sword. Gardner watched Aint Armian and said that even with all these hardships, he had a lot of talent. He declared he would fully support Aint's plan to restore House Armian's former glory. For Gardner, maybe the late emperor had foreseen all of this and left him behind precisely to help. While they were reflecting on this, a voice called out asking if Aint Armian was there. Gardner, realizing the interruption, said he would talk with him again later. Aint was curious and asked who was calling him. On the other side, the voice answered that it was his superior. When he opened the door, Aint saw it was Fernan and was surprised to see him there at that moment. Fernan asked if he was busy. Aint replied there was nothing urgent to do. Then Fernan said he wanted to borrow a bit of his time and, since they were in such a crowded place, asked him to come along to somewhere quieter. Aint asked him to wait 10 minutes so he could tidy up a bit before leaving. Fernan questioned whether he really planned to make such an important superior wait that long. He commented that in his day, even if someone was asleep, they had to come out in their underwear as soon as they were called by a superior, saying that newcomers were too soft these days. Faced with this, Aint gave in and said he'd be ready in 5 minutes. Fernan replied that he'd be lenient and wait for him in front of the dorms. While getting ready, Gardner grew deeply irritated and asked who that old man was. Aint explained that he was Fernan Pellenberg, the eldest of House Pellenberg. Gardner was shocked, saying, wasn't that the family that had suddenly gotten rich and that all they had was money? He questioned what they could possibly do against a direct descendant of the emperor. Aint, for his part, wondered what Fernan really wanted with him. He was sure he wasn't there to collect payment for the potion he had given before, since Fernan himself had said that it was just an investment. The scene shifts to when the two meet. Fernan remarks that he also brought his sword. Aint explains that he only brought it because he feels calmer with it in his hand, swearing it doesn't mean anything. Fernan says he understands that very well since knights never part with their swords. However, he suspects that sword might contain Gardner's ego inside it. Aint asks why Fernan wanted so badly to talk to him like that. Fernan brushes it off, saying it was nothing important and that he didn't need to worry. He just wanted to have a meal with him and told him to choose anything he wanted to eat. Aint, embarrassed, refused, saying he was fine and that the place was too expensive. Fernan almost started scolding him like in the old days, telling him he shouldn't turn down a meal offered by a superior but held himself back. Even so, Aint, a bit nervous, eventually agreed and said he would look at the menu right away. Meanwhile, Fernan watched him closely. He thought the boy was very naive and easy to handle. Even so, he couldn't understand how someone like him could destroy him in the future. Fernan then asked if Aint had any goals or plans after graduating from the academy. He commented that most people went to the academy to build connections, but the Armian house had avoided all social gatherings, claiming they needed to rebuild. He found it curious that someone from that family was there. Aint replied that he was tired of being treated like fallen royalty. Even if they were just a name now, they were still royalty. That's why he wanted to become a royal knight one day, to restore his family's honor. Fernan noticed that the boy's expression changed completely when he talked about his dream. He saw in him a strong determination and ambition to achieve his goal. He also saw the pride he had in his lineage. He realized then that Aint wasn't as pathetic as he seemed at first glance. Fernan asked if he had any dietary restrictions, and Aint said no. Then he wanted to know his MBTI, but Aint didn't even know what that was. The narrative shifts again to Fernan, who was reflecting on that conversation. He felt he was beginning to understand what kind of person Aint Armian was. He thought about improvising on the spot to try to sponsor him, but concluded it was good he hadn't done that yet. He then picked up an analysis sheet about Aint Armian, which noted that the boy had strong family pride, high self-esteem, and valued honor. He was the ideal type for a long-term investment. Fernan realized that if he had just thrown money at him immediately, he would have hurt his pride. He knew that with that kind of personality, a subtle push would work much better than an obvious favor. So he decided he would need to slowly build a relationship of trust, as if gradually infiltrating his life. He concluded that if he had patience and waited for the right moment, there would come a time when Aint would need him. Fernan thought to himself that when the right moment came, Aint Armian would fall into his trap like a fish caught on a hook. He imagined he would make the boy his ally and use him to the fullest until there was nothing left to give. Even knowing how cruel it sounded, he saw it as an inevitable part of the political game he was involved in. At that moment, Hyde entered the room since his young master had returned. He asked where he had gone. Fernan replied that he had met someone very interesting. Hyde asked if, by any chance, he had gone to meet Birchev, bringing up the topic unexpectedly. Fernan got annoyed at that and asked why he was suddenly bringing it up. Hyde explained that he had an appointment with Luina Birchev that day to settle a debt. He said that if he'd known Fernan would be so late, he would have sent the young lady away. He told him that he asked her to wait a little, thinking Fernan would be back quickly, but she ended up waiting 3 hours and left, thinking he was ignoring her on purpose to discourage her. Fernan replied coldly that it would have been better if he really had managed to discourage her. Even so, he commented that he had worked hard to keep Birchev trapped in that situation and that they should continue putting pressure on her. As he spoke, Fernan felt a strong, unexpected headache. Hyde, worried, asked if he was okay. Fernan said it was nothing, just a sudden pain. But inside he reflected that there was something in the prophecy he still couldn't decipher. He remembered how it had appeared in his mind so vividly. It spoke of brown hair like clouds and eyes the color of aquamarine, describing only part of someone. It mentioned a sword more precious, beautiful, noble, and alive than any other, and how Aint had been captivated by the dance of her sword under the moonlight. He thought that this person had enough talent to become a royal knight, but also carried a darkness in her heart. The prophecy said that if the shackles binding her were broken, she would spread her wings and fly freely. He concluded that perhaps these shackles were the debt and the dependence she had on the Pellenberg house, and that he himself would have to free her from that situation to let her follow her path. Fernan reflected that maybe that was why he couldn't completely hate everything about it. Realizing these things, he ended up cursing out loud in anger. Hyde, who was nearby, thought the curse was directed at him and got scared, but Fernan clarified that he wasn't talking to him and that there was no need to worry. The narrative then shifts to Luina, who kept thinking about Fernan. She wondered what he really wanted with her, especially after ignoring her like that. She was desperate because of an enormous debt and feared he just wanted to crush her once and for all. On the other side, Fernan was also thinking about her even from far away. He could feel the anger she harbored toward him. At that moment, he was at the Birchev Manor, a family that had once been hereditary dukes responsible for guarding the empire's northern border. The Birchev house had been one of the 7 most respected electoral houses, famous for its military strength. However, a devastating wave of monsters caused immense destruction in their lands, shattered their power, and ruined their prestige. To try to rebuild their house, Birchev had to sell everything they owned, including the official charters of the Golden Bull that proved their rights as an electoral house. Even so, they couldn't pay off all their debts. At the time, the one who offered the loan contract was Duke Ivan Pellenberg, Fernan's father. Fernan wondered why his father had sympathized with Birchev, but quickly remembered it wasn't out of pure kindness. The Pellenberg house didn't have great talent with the sword, only with magic, and saw Birchev's tragedy as the perfect opportunity to gain access to their secret fencing techniques. Fernan's father had prevented other nobles from providing financial help to the Birchev house, forcing them to accept a loan from the Pellenbergs instead. With that, Birchev managed to avoid immediate extinction, but the accumulating interest kept them in constant suffering. Fernan knew that if they had wanted to, they could have pressured them even more until they extracted every single sword technique from them. He also knew that, according to the prophecy, Luina was destined to become very close to Aint Armian, maybe even his future partner. He thought Aint was rebuilding his house, saving the world, and falling in love all at once. To him, Aint was getting everything anyone could want in life. Even so, Fernan admitted to himself that he needed to let go of those secret sword techniques, since Luina was forming a bond with Aint. He knew that, at the very least, he needed to make sure she didn't completely hate him. That was when he decided to approach Luina. He asked if she was there for dinner and apologized for the previous night, saying he'd been distracted and forgot about their appointment. He swore it hadn't been on purpose, trying to ease the tension between them. Luina said to Fernan that the weaker one always ends up bearing the injustice. Fernan, however, replied that it hadn't been quite as she was saying. Luina tried to end the topic by saying she'd pretend it hadn't happened that way. Even so, Fernan insisted he hadn't done anything on purpose. Luina then asked why he wanted to meet with her. Fernan thought she probably already knew the reason, but needed to make a good impression since his Operation Win Over Luina Burchef was only in Phase 1. Fernan explained that starting in the second year, the Magic and Night departments would have joint classes. At that moment, Luina immediately said no before he could finish. Fernan complained that she wouldn't even let him finish his sentence and asked how she could know what he was going to say if he hadn't even said it yet. Luina argued that he probably wanted to propose a partnership and questioned why she should accept since she had nothing to gain from him. She reminded him she was in second place in her department while he was in 10th, so she had much better options. Fernan then made his offer clearly. If she agreed to be his partner for the next 3 years, he would waive the interest payments on her family's debt. For him, that was the condition for her to accept the sponsorship. Luina, confused, was surprised and asked why he was doing that. Fernan replied that the joint classes were very important. She corrected him, saying she wasn't asking about the classes, but wanted to know why he not only wanted to partner with her but also intended to sponsor her. She reminded him that, in case he didn't know, she was studying at the academy on a scholarship. Fernan explained that he knew. He was aware that she sent most of her money to her family, and that everyone knew she lived in the dormitory in very modest conditions, even tighter than some commoner students. He emphasized that, for him, sponsorship didn't mean anything special. He just wanted to invest in someone with a lot of talent. Luina shot back that she had never heard of one noble sponsoring another. Fernan then thought to himself that she was similar to Aint Armian because she valued her integrity so highly. He explained that yes, both Pellenberg and Burchef were noble houses, but that didn't mean they were the same. Even while acknowledging the very high honor of the Burchef house, he said it was nothing compared to the former royal house. Luina, irritated, asked if he was trying to insult her. Fernan thought that unlike the Armian house, he had control over her, so even if she hated him, she would have to accept his final offer. He said it wasn't the time to let pride get in the way, and insisted that what he had said about her talent was true. He then moved on to the second phase of his strategy and admitted he had recently seen her swordsmanship in action. At that moment, he remembered the prophecies that spoke about her. He thought her sword was more precious, beautiful, and noble, and that she needed to live more than any other. He believed she wouldn't reject someone who genuinely recognized her pure talent. Luina, very startled, asked what Fernan actually was. He stood up, saying he couldn't forget the first time he saw her sword dance. He began speaking almost poetically, saying her sword was noble, beautiful, graceful, and righteous. He said it was faster than light and as gentle as butterfly wings. He admitted that every movement of her sword haunted his mind every night and kept him from sleeping. Luina was horrified, finding him extremely disgusting, and asked him to stop. Fernan, however, kept pushing, saying he couldn't stop because he hadn't yet found the perfect phrase to describe the beauty of her swordsmanship. Luina was so embarrassed by that, just to end the situation quickly, she ended up agreeing to be his partner. Thus, Fernan considered his mission to win over Luina Burchef a success. The scene then shifts to the moment of formalizing the agreement. A woman read the conditions aloud: 3 years of interest-free debt and sponsorship, with a confidentiality clause to keep the sponsorship private until her graduation. In exchange, Luina had to be his class partner for 3 years. Luina, now calmer and smiling, admitted it was too good a deal to refuse. Fernan then said he had seen a lot of potential in the way she wielded her sword. This ended up angering one of the maids standing beside her, who asked what exactly he had seen that was so special. Luina, embarrassed, replied that he had just recognized her potential. She reminded them that he said her sword was the most precious, beautiful, and noble he had ever seen. Fernan still hadn't found the perfect words to describe Luina's beauty. Her maid was very annoyed, saying that man obsessed with money must be scheming something, since he had such a sharp eye for spotting talent. But this time he was going too far. Luina asked the maid to be more careful with what she said, since he was the heir to the Pellenberg family. Even so, the maid insisted she was sure he was trying to charm her with that piercing gaze. Luina noticed the change in the maid's tone and asked if she wasn't feeling attracted to him. The maid explained that it didn't seem like he was trying to seduce her, but admitted the whole thing was suspicious, especially since he had given up 3 years of interest just to help a family. The maid reminded her that Luina was second in the class while Fernan was only 10th. At that moment, Hyde arrived and announced that Lord Fernan wanted to see Luina, saying he was waiting for her at the training grounds and asking her to go as quickly as possible. Luina was confused, not understanding why he was calling her there, and wondered what he really wanted. At the training grounds, Fernan was waiting for her with a confident and elegant air. It was explained that Luina Burchef had always been second in her class, while the top student in the second-year night department was Alain Dornetz, whom she had never managed to defeat. Even so, people said Luina had the talent to become one of the 10 royal knights of the entire continent, although there was a certain darkness in her heart. Fernan reflected that he would soon see who she really was. When Luina arrived, still not understanding anything, he explained that he didn't want her to think there was nothing to gain by being his partner, so he wanted to show he wasn't inferior in combat. She realized he intended to prove it right then. Although Fernan was only 10th, he had earned the right to enter the Hall of Revidos, which showed his great skill. Even so, there was a clear gap between 2nd and 10th place. Fernan, smiling, said he wanted to test exactly that difference. Luina accepted the challenge, saying she would love to see him try to prove his worth and let him have the first move. Fernan was pleased to take the initiative. He began chanting spells in another language and hurled stones at Luina, which she easily cut down. She quickly closed in, thinking she had finally cornered him, but he surprised her by casting another spell and teleporting, leaving her startled. Luina noticed he had destroyed part of the training grounds floor, something normal strikes couldn't do, concluding that his magic was very powerful. She began to wonder if Fernan Pellenberg had been hiding his strength all along. Luina was impressed to see that he could do multiple conversions and link several high-level spells, questioning how much mana he possessed. She realized this was not something worthy of someone in 10th place, recognizing that she had underestimated him. At one point, she managed to get very close, ready to defeat him, but Fernan dropped his staff and raised his hands, saying he surrendered. Luina found that odd and realized he really was out of mana. A mage without mana couldn't beat a knight. She recognized that she had blocked all his attacks until he ran out of energy, guaranteeing her victory. Even so, despite winning, she had a bad feeling about it. Fernan said he had a gift for her, handing something over and explaining it was because she had won. He mentioned he had heard she really liked chocolate and offered her a whiskey-filled chocolate made by his family. Luina was embarrassed but couldn't hide how much she wanted to eat it. Fernan commented that if she didn't like that type, he could offer her the famous Fredeni World Tree Bark chocolate or even a special whiskey chocolate from the Kingdom of Franzia. She asked if he had investigated her personal tastes, and Fernan explained that he wouldn't bother investigating someone like her specifically, but that he had checked the data for all the top-ranked students. Luina retorted that that was exactly what she was talking about, making it clear she wasn't a child who would accept chocolate just because she wanted duel. Finally, Fernan apologized, saying he thought she would like it and that he could take it back if she didn't want it. Fernan quickly took the chocolate from Luina's hand, saying she never actually said she wouldn't accept the gift. He smiled and commented that they needed to continue, but Luina asked him to wait a moment because she wanted to understand something. She asked why he had such a huge amount of mana, able to launch heavy attacks on his own, saying she couldn't even imagine the limits of his body. With skills like that, it didn't make sense for him to be only in 10th place. Fernan smiled and explained that it was obvious since a good merchant never drew too much attention to any particular area. The scene then shifted to another moment when he showed his broken staff. Hyde asked what had happened for him to completely destroy both the mana storage and amplifier. Fernan explained that he had dueled with Luina, saying she was very strong. He had gone in well prepared but was still defeated. She had forced him to use all his mana and had withstood all his attacks. Hyde asked why he had used such valuable items just to fight her. Fernan replied that it was all just an investment for the future. He reflected that Aint Armian's judgment wasn't wrong, since Luina's sword was very fast and elegant and at first glance even looked noble. Now he understood why his father coveted the Berchev family's secret sword art so much. He acknowledged that Luina was very talented but wondered why she never reached first place. He suspected it might be due to inferior equipment. Hyde then asked what he intended to do about the Duke, since the secret Berchev sword art was something his father had wanted for a long time. Fernan said he hadn't really thought about it, but now that Hyde mentioned it, he admitted he was a little worried. He wondered if his father might even disown him over it. Hyde commented that he might not go so far as to disown him, but would probably kill him after everything. Fernan thought he didn't believe his father would kill his own son just for disrupting his plans. Even so, to avoid bigger problems, he decided to send a letter to his father explaining the situation with the Berchevs and wait for a reply. He even imagined his father fainting upon reading it. Despite these worries tormenting him, he tried to ignore them as much as he could. A few days later, his father's reply arrived much faster than he expected. Fernan even felt emotional, thinking they might finally resolve things. But when he read the letter, he was terrified. His father said he was possessed by a demon. Fernan was extremely frightened and realized he needed to go back to talk to him as soon as possible. He thought he couldn't tell the truth about having obtained a prophetic book, since there was no way to prove such a thing existed. He feared being called a crazy merchant or being accused of trying to ruin the family family's name. He needed to think of something that would at least compensate for all that loss. When he finally met with his father, the man said he seemed more normal than expected and asked if his son had been using drugs or had simply gone insane. Failing that, he wondered if the demon killed by the first emperor had come back to life to possess his body. Rejecting all those theories, he demanded Fernan give a convincing explanation immediately. Fernan stated that he intended to make a much better investment with the Bershefs. His father asked what investment could possibly be more valuable than their secret sword art. Fernan, however, said that at that moment he couldn't reveal what the plan was. His father grew furious, making it clear this wasn't a request but an order. He called his son a sinner and accused him of wasting the entire family fortune. Fernan said he was aware of all that, but his thoughts had changed a lot. He believed that if his father completely entrusted the Bershef matter to him, he could secure an even greater profit than their secret sword art would bring. Fernan's father then said he would ask again what the source of that confidence was. But Fernan repeated that he couldn't tell, which made his father even angrier. He said it was absurd and that he couldn't have raised someone so reckless. He insisted it couldn't simply be treated as a child's tantrum. Fernan thought this reaction was expected of his father. He realized he had no choice but to do what the prophecy had indicated to reach an agreement. He didn't want to use that card yet, but he had no other option. He then said that in exchange, he would take full responsibility for the Bershef problem and would give information that only he knew. He mentioned that his father already knew he had a personal risk management intelligence group. His father, skeptical, said he doubted that group was better than the ones he already had, but ordered him to go on and explain what this exclusive information was. Fernan explained that west of the Aris Mountains, in Viscount Donetz's territory, a magic crystal mine had recently been discovered. His father asked if it was really a crystal mine, since he had never heard of anything like that in that area. He wanted to know how Fernan had discovered something like that with an intelligence group he considered no better than a bunch of kids playing house. Fernan replied that kids really did dig holes in the ground, and sometimes were lucky enough to find even a buried coin. He explained that the place in the Arus Mountains was like a mountain of money, enough to cover all the losses. It was said that magic stone was a mineral containing mana, and was therefore considered one of the most valuable resources, generating a lot of money. However, the magic stone deposit in the Arus Mountains had only been mentioned very briefly in the prophecy, without any detail. Fernan thought he hadn't seen it with his own eyes and had no idea of its real size, but believed it would probably buy him some time. In addition, the shipment controlled by the Donetz family had sunk because of a typhoon, leaving their finances in bad shape. If they somehow managed to get their hands on that mine, they could use this advantage to balance the accounts and delay as much as possible the need to reveal the existence of the prophecy. His father said that if it was true, they could offset the damage he had caused, but that they would need to verify if it was real. He warned that it would take some time and asked Fernan to focus on his studies, promising to get in touch when there was news. Fernan wondered if he had managed to calm his father's anger and felt as if his life had been shortened by 10 years. But at that moment, his father called him back, and Fernan wondered if he had done something wrong. However, his father simply said that since they were there, why didn't they have a meal together? Changing scenes, Ivan commented that he was a little disappointed with his butler Hyde since Black Turtle hadn't managed to find out what Fernan had discovered. Hyde apologized to Evan and said he would review the intelligence unit again. Evan then told him to take it easy and not be too harsh. He asked what Hyde thought of Fernan. Hyde said that Fernan was trying to negotiate with the Duke and had therefore become a respectable merchant. Even so, Evan said he had doubts about how Fernan had discovered a magic stone mine. He remarked that they would learn from Fernan's intelligence squad over time and that maybe they were experts in minerals. Hyde asked about the golden pillar. Ivan explained that his son knew very well that minerals were a major source of money, which was why he had chosen to be an earth mage even though he had high affinity with fire. He acknowledged, however, that they still needed to confirm the information first. Hyde said that maybe Fernan really had a golden pillar, and that it was possible he had developed the organization beyond what they expected, focusing on mines and ore veins. Ivan smiled, saying that boy had always been so interested in minerals and that no one would imagine he'd do something so extraordinary. But right after that, he asked Hyde to find out everything about the Berchef ruins and get all the details about how Luina had managed to seduce Fernan. Hyde asked if Ivan was saying that the young master was in love with Luina, but Ivan replied that there was no reason at all to invest in something that didn't bring profit. If Fernan ended up investing in something without any apparent reason, it meant he was paying attention to something else that truly attracted him, even if he wouldn't admit it. For Evan, it was very likely that boy was hiding something from him. him. After all, what would someone who loved money even more than his own father choose for his life? The scene shifts to Luina and Fernan. He explains that the Tortega faction partnered with Carlos Deneve. Luina replies that after she said she'd partner with Fernan, Carlos decided to join Alia. Fernan then comments that the Tortega faction came in 4th place in the Knights department. Luina clarifies that it was originally in 5th place, but she had managed to get better results. Fernan points out that since she had said she'd partner with him, rumors would spread anyway, so he didn't understand why she was so worried about it. Luina thinks that everyone said she only accepted the partnership because of money, something she had expected and would have to deal with, recognizing they weren't completely wrong. Fernan admits to himself that he really liked money a lot and believed there was nothing in the world he couldn't buy. She reflects that it was no surprise, since everyone called him the demon of money, and that was exactly why she hated him. Next, Fernan offers her something, an elixir and a voucher. The elixir was made from refined mandrake roots, and the voucher could be used at the weapon shop run by his company to get high-quality equipment. Luina questions why he was doing that, saying she wouldn't be able to pay it back. Fernan reminds her of the sponsorship contract they had signed. She argues that even so, Golden Turtle's equipment was way too expensive. From his reaction, it seemed even he thought it was excessive, but Fernan denies it, even though in his mind he admits she was right. For Fernan, that was the price to win Luina's favor and prevent his future from ending in ruin. He considered the gift very cheap if it meant ensuring a better future for himself. Besides, if she became strong enough to help him fight demons, that would be even better. Luina thinks it's all too much and says she can't accept it, but Fernan reminds her that refusing the sponsorship would be a contractual violation and could lead to termination with a penalty. Furious, she ends up accepting the gift. Fernan then gets up, saying they would meet later in the classroom since he still had work to take care of. Luina keeps thinking that even as a sponsorship, the value was too high. She starts wondering if there was really a penalty clause in the contract, but isn't sure. Then she wonders why he would lie just to give her such valuable items, and whether he was trying to seduce her to steal her sword. Despite this suspicion, she concludes that even if he tried, he wouldn't stand a chance of succeeding. The narrative shifts to Fernan, who is looking for Aint, imagining he must be attending the department's lecture. Just at that moment, he spots the boy. The lecture was the first for the Knights department first years and covered war and real-life sparring, being famous for accurately assessing students' levels through friendly duels. According to the prophecy, Aint, who had won the sword with Sir Gardner's ego, began to stand out more and more and became very famous, starting the story of the hero destined to save the world. At that moment, a blonde man approaches Fernan, curious about who was so special that Fernan Pellenberg had come all the way there to see him. Fernan calls him Your Majesty and asks how he is doing. The man says it's been a long time since they last talked and returns the question about how Fernan is. Fernan reflects that since it was their first meeting since they entered the 2nd year, they could allow themselves less formal greetings. The blonde man then asks if Fernan was interested in any of the new students. Fernan explains that he always kept an eye on those who stood out in the rankings, but the other man says clearly that he himself had come there to see Aint, since he was a member of one of the old imperial families. It was natural that those who hadn't seen anyone from the Armian family enter the academy in the last 100 years would be curious when one finally managed to get in. Fernan recognizes in his thoughts that the man in front of him was Ludger Schwaben, the 2nd prince of the imperial family Schwaben. They had been on the throne for 3 generations since they were elected as the imperial family 100 years ago. Despite that position, they had origins similar to the Armians, which made the relationship between the old and the current imperial family extremely tense. Moreover, Ludger was someone who valued authority greatly and wanted to ensure that the Schwaben family would continue to inherit the throne. Because of this, the mere existence of Aint, with an even stronger legitimacy, was a major concern for his family. Ludger mentions that there was someone else interested in Aint. When Fernan looks in the indicated direction, he spots Varen Kalbunder. Ludger explains that Varen had entered the Knights Academy as the 2nd best student in that class and was trying to seize the opportunity to take the place left vacant by the fallen Armian as an elector. That was exactly why he was watching Aint so closely all the time. Fernan thinks that Varen's presence there might be just a coincidence, but wonders if the relationship between Ludger and Varen hadn't actually started on that occasion. Among all those heroic elements of a story, there was always a villain the protagonist needed to overcome in order to grow. After defeating that obstacle, the hero would reveal his past and make everyone understand his journey. For Aint, the protagonist of that prophecy, Varen would be the next antagonist to be faced. Meanwhile, the judge announces that the next to fight would be Anton Dern and Aint Armian. Fernan observes that at that moment Ludger and his ally Varen were together, in the same place, witnessing the true beginning of Aint's hero's journey. He wonders if all of that really was destiny unfolding. In his thoughts, Fernan remembers the prophecy that said Aint Armian would win that battle and that everyone watching would be completely astonished by the result. The battle began when that boy quickly charged at Aint. Although he was a little scared, Aint managed to block the first strike with his sword. When the opponent tried to hit his neck, he reacted quickly by jumping over him to escape. Anton Dern was known for having ranked 10th in the entrance exam, making him a very tough opponent for Aint Armian, who had only placed 38th. Ludger watched the fight with a hint of disdain and, despite Aint being ranked number 38, had expected something more exciting. For him, the fight was boring, so he told Fernan there was nothing interesting to see and that he planned to leave. However, at that moment, Aint gathered his courage, gripped his sword, and launched an unexpected attack. The strike was so fast the opponent couldn't react and ended up with part of his clothing cut. This feat surprised everyone watching and earned their admiration. Anton Dern began to reflect that maybe he had been caught off guard from the start. His aggressive attack had confused Aint but also showed his own inexperience. Even so, he tried to stay calm during the duel but couldn't accept losing to someone ranked 38. Consumed by rage, Anton released a dense aura showing all his frustration. Among the spectators, some commented that Aint was much better than they had imagined, but even so, they reminded each other he hadn't been able to save his imperial family and that someone ranked 38 wouldn't change anything for them. Ludger admitted it was impressive to see a rank 38 force the 10th place to release his aura. He said that, at least, Aint lived up to the Armian name. He noted that even without talent, Aint was trying very hard, but Fernan disagreed with that view. He thought Aint Armian wasn't someone without talent. In fact, he had never had anyone's support even though he was very special and was destined, according to the prophecy, to be the protagonist. The fight continued intensely until Aint managed to get behind his opponent and disarm him, taking his sword. With that, the judge declared Aint Armian the winner of the battle. Everyone talked about how he had managed to defeat Anton Dern, an unexpected achievement. Fernan reflected that the prophecy had come true once again and felt relieved that he had chosen to support Aint. He knew he needed to make Aint ally with him as soon as possible. His next goal would be to defeat Luina to solidify his plans. Meanwhile, some people looked at Fernan and Luina and wondered if they were really a couple. They questioned why Luina would accept someone like him. Fernan realized they were drawing attention, but Luina kept her composure, thinking that eventually people would stop talking about it. Fernan worried about whether she had taken the elixir and changed her equipment. Even though she didn't want to pay attention to him, she was excited about having changed her equipment and even more thrilled for having taken the elixir, which made her stronger. Despite trying to seem cold, she admitted to herself that it hadn't been anything special, but it hadn't been bad either. At that moment, a woman appeared saying that everyone had already formed pairs and that no one was late for her class. She introduced herself as Professor Rosalia from the Magic Department and explained that from that moment on, the Magic and Night departments would have joint classes. The professor said the first activity would be a practical lecture and that everyone would receive a map from the assistants. Another teacher explained that the best way to learn was through real practice. They would be sent to a training field and needed to reach the marked destination on the map in exactly 4 hours, neither earlier nor later, precisely at 2 p.m. When asked if there were any questions, one student asked if this would affect their grade. The teacher explained that the activity would be the most important one after the midterm exam. Another student asked if conflicts would be allowed, and Professor Rosalia replied that capturing someone would grant extra points. With no more questions, she wished everyone good luck and teleported all the students to the exercise location. As soon as they arrived, Fernan looked around trying to figure out where they were, while Luina said they needed to quickly figure it out and that the most important thing at that moment was to check the map. As they walked through the training field, Fernan and Luina came across 2 people ahead of them. Fernan quickly recognized them as Jane Hux and Ned Palin, classmates who were probably outside the top 70 in the overall ranking. Luina asked Fernan if it was really worth it to fight people with such a low ranking, questioning the need to waste time there. Fernan, for his part, decided to agree with her idea this time. Luina then suggested that before anything else, they should secure some bonus points by defeating those 2, and then check the map to figure out exactly where they were. Fernan asked if it wouldn't be easier to use magic for that, but Luina reminded him that there was no magic that could precisely locate the exact point. He explained that he didn't mean it literally, but that they could climb to a higher spot to get a better view of the terrain. Luina countered that it wasn't so different from simply looking at the map. While they talked, Ned suggested to Jane that they run away, but Luina immediately charged at them, determined to secure the extra points. Without giving them a chance to flee, they defeated the two with ease. After the brief skirmish, Fernan remarked that there was a defensive spell on the participants' maps to help prevent serious injuries. Luina replied that if she had known that earlier, she wouldn't have held back so much. Fernan found it funny she called that holding back, since she had nearly knocked them out. Meanwhile, the professors monitoring the activity watched the eliminations happening faster than expected. Rosalia commented that no student had been defeated by monsters so far, and that it was interesting to see that everyone eliminated had been taken out by conflicts with other students. One of the teachers asked if Rosalia was interested in watching any pair in particular. She replied that based on grades alone, the pair formed by Ludger and Alan was the strongest. She also mentioned that Carlos de Neve and Alia formed another interesting pair to watch, but without a doubt, the pair that caught her attention the most was Luina and Fernan. The professor remarked that that pair was causing quite a stir among the students. He observed that Luina, normally so competitive, might even be at a disadvantage by teaming up with Fernan, which made people curious about her reasons. Some thought it was just because of money. But Fernan didn't seem to care much about grades. Rosalia explained there was probably another reason they had formed a pair. She said Fernan was a very peculiar student. He always stayed in the top 10, which was strange. Usually, a student was either exceptional and consistently held first place, or their ranking fluctuated. In his case, his written exams were nearly perfect, but he always lost just enough points in the practical exams to maintain a stable average, avoiding too much attention. She suspected he was deliberately hiding his true abilities. The professor was surprised and asked if she was sure. Rosalia reminded him that the training field had recently been destroyed and the faculty had been looking for who was responsible. In fact, it had been Fernan and Luina who did it, which explained why she was so curious about them. The professor wanted to know why Fernan would hide his abilities, but Rosalia admitted she didn't know the answer. The scene then shifted back to Fernan, who was analyzing the map trying to figure out where they were. He concluded they were probably in the western mountain region. Luina, after defeating a few more participants to rack up bonus points, asked if he knew where they should go. Fernan replied that he did, saying the destination was to the northeast. He asked her to help him find the next group so they could earn more points. Luina agreed, saying they still had plenty of time and could make the most of it. But at that moment, someone launched an attack at them without warning. Fernan managed to block the strike in time. When they realized who the attacker was, they saw it was Carlos de Neve. Luina was outraged by the sneaky attack and questioned his honor for acting that way. Carlos de Neve, however, coldly replied that he didn't see anything dishonorable about real combat, reminding them that the professor had said it was genuine training. He added that he wouldn't let her leave without facing him after what had happened earlier. Aint asked why Carlos de Neve seemed so furious. Fernan thought it was probably because Luina had refused to partner with him for the activity. He also felt that Carlos de Neve's wounded pride explained his anger. Even so, Fernan considered his attitude childish and regretted seeing someone so strong act so petty, which left Carlos de Neve visibly embarrassed and angry. Fernan realized that a confrontation with Carlos de Neve and Alia was inevitable at that point. Luina didn't seem worried and remarked that it could actually be perfect since capturing a high-quality team would yield lots of bonus points. However, given they were facing such a strong pair, Fernan really would have to help. Even though he was bored, Fernan agreed to cooperate. Luina noted they hadn't even coordinated their moves yet and questioned how he could help like that. Fernan explained that since they were a team now, they'd have to fight together, but asked her not to worry too much and just do her best. Meanwhile, from a distance, Rosalia commented to the other professor that a big fight was about to break out. Her colleague asked if the students were fighting monsters, but Rosalia explained that monsters didn't appear in that region. Instead, she said that two pairs she was especially interested in had collided. She was excited, saying the battle would be very interesting because she could finally see the true abilities of Fernan Pellenberg. On the battlefield, the fight was very even. Luina noticed her body felt much lighter than usual, which made her suspect some kind of support magic from Fernan. She wondered how he managed to cast so many spells at once. Fernan, noticing her stare, simply winked as if confirming the trick, leaving Luina annoyed at how bold he was. Even so, she understood it wasn't the time to be distracted. She first needed to defeat Alia. During the duel, Carlos de Neve managed to trap Luina, creating an opening for Alia to try to finish her. But at the critical moment, Luina vanished, replaced by a stone. Fernan had managed to teleport her in time. When they regrouped, Luina furiously asked how he had done that. Fernan calmly explained it was a technique recently developed by his family that he had learned. The magic allowed two objects of equal weight to be swapped. This made her even more irritated because it meant he had to know her exact weight to perform the spell. Fernan tried to calm things down by saying her weight was just listed in the student records, but Luina was furious, saying that record needed to be destroyed. In the middle of the argument, she threatened to hunt down the document and burn it to ashes. Despite the tense mood between them, Fernan refocused on the fight and said he would take care of Alia, asking Luina to focus on blocking Carlos Deneve. As he analyzed the enemy, Fernan wondered why Carlos wasn't using his specialty, the ability to summon a rain of lightning or a massive pillar of light formed by dozens of electrical discharges, a technique known as multicasting. That power had destructive force well beyond the student standard and was exactly what made him the best in the department. However, Fernan had already studied how to block that attack and now wanted to test if his strategy really worked. In the next moment, Carlos Deneve unleashed a powerful beam of lightning directly at Fernan, leaving everyone present worried he might die. When the smoke cleared, Fernan was unharmed. Carlos Deneve was shocked to see that his attack had no effect. Fernan then explained he was using small devices that stored and absorbed mana. He said he had modified them to be even more efficient, even though they were very expensive and difficult to make. He added that the result seemed worth it. Carlos Deneve accused Fernan of cheating for using such an artifact. But Fernan simply fired back, asking what was cowardly about it and reminding him the professor had said it was real training. That left Carlos Deneve extremely embarrassed since those had been his own words at the start of the fight. Meanwhile, Luina took advantage of the opening to launch a decisive attack against Alia, completely defeating her. Elsewhere, Ludger commented to his partner that only 2 of the 4 participants in that fight were left, concluding that some had been eliminated and teleported out of the exercise by the assistants. His partner noted that few students were capable of blocking Carlos Deneve's lightning magic, which made that victory even more impressive. Ludger, however, said he wasn't that surprised, since he knew Fernan always avoided drawing attention, deliberately hiding his true potential. Ludger reflected that Fernan had hidden his real abilities up to that point, but now that he was paired with Luina, he wouldn't be able to conceal his power anymore, since he had to keep up with her. If he showed everything he knew, his ranking would certainly rise a lot. Ludger also considered that he was surrounded by people who would seize the slightest chance to bring him down if his own ranking fell. That was why he couldn't just let a potential rival like Fernan act freely. He thought that if everyone followed him, they'd safely reach the destination and still earn a high placement in that test. However, there was one pair he needed to eliminate first, Luina and Fernan. Meanwhile, Luina and Fernan were advancing along the route, defeating monsters along the way. They were almost at the destination, which explained the increase in the number of creatures. Luina remarked that even so, they seemed to have arrived at just the right time and might even finish in first place. Fernan, however, was distracted, busy collecting troll blood. Luina found it strange and asked if that was really necessary. Fernan explained that troll blood was one of the most important ingredients for making potions. She said that was nothing compared to his wealth and seemed like mere pocket change. But Fernan said money was money, no matter the amount. She replied that that was why everyone called him the money demon. Fernan agreed, saying he'd only managed to recruit Luina because of that, making the deal very profitable for both of them. Then he asked how many pairs they had defeated. Luina replied it was 8 pairs, and that she was still counting on a big bonus. Fernan commented that she had completely lost control chasing points, and Luina shot back that it was better than being greedy for money. She added that she had a good reason to be the top student at the academy. At that moment, they noticed a large group approaching. Fernan estimated there were at least 20 people. He quickly concluded that they all seemed to be hunting the 2 of them, and the attack began immediately. Suddenly, Alan lunged at Luina, surprising her by also being there, while Ludger charged directly at Fernan. After a powerful clash between the 2, Ludger admitted he had only planned to watch him, but that Fernan had eliminated half of his followers in an instant. He remarked that Fernan was really taking the test seriously. Fernan replied that he just wanted to be in first place at least once in his life, but Ludger disagreed, saying that wouldn't happen. He suggested resolving it peacefully, pointing out there was less than an hour left before the end of the test, and that if they fought there, no one would be able to complete it. Luina, however, said she'd rather die than give up on a good fight. Fernan ended up agreeing with her. Ludger, smiling, concluded that negotiations had failed and that they'd see what each of them had to show. But before they could restart the fight, they ended up trapped in a magic circle. Earth barriers rose around them, forming a trap so well made that even Luina couldn't believe what was happening. Fernan, realizing there was nothing more to do, admitted they were done and suggested they try again next time. Elsewhere, the professors were watching everything and commented that the group had done an excellent job. They then decided to announce the test rankings. Luina and Fernan came in first place, while Ludger and Alan were second. Fernan watched with satisfaction that they had secured first place. Luina, still surprised, remarked that they hadn't even managed to defeat Alan in direct combat. But Fernan explained that what mattered was the final score, not who they had beaten or lost to. Luina, excited, acknowledged that it was the first time she had ever finished in first place, and that it was really amazing. One of the professors then told everyone they'd be returning to the academy soon and asked them not to wander off, closing that stage of the training. Luina wanted to know if Fernan knew the new student, and he thought that anyone there would know Aint Armian. She told him she had met him one night during training, in a situation that reminded her of when Fernan had secretly seen her dancing with her sword. But this time he was worried because it tied to a prophecy, and another hidden part of that prophecy had just been revealed. It was written that Aint Armian had reached out to her, inviting her to be his knight, but Luina hadn't accepted. Fernan wondered what that meant and remembered the part that spoke of a sky red as blood, a thick and suffocating miasma, and a monstrous evil like the end of the world approaching Aint Armian. He also remembered that in that vision he saw the back of a noble knight before him and wondered if the story had changed. Elsewhere, it was written that Aint Armian had invited her before, but she refused, and now that she knew who he was and the reason for his fight, that was her destiny. It was explained that a knight should be both the sword that defeats their lord's enemies and the shield that protects them. Then it was told that Luina attacked the demon Andromalius, and a bright blue aura appeared around her. Luina woke up in a bed, and Aint's eyes burned with fury as he looked at her in that state, blaming those who had tried to destroy her and her home. He said those responsible were the Pellenbergs, a rich and corrupt family. Fernan grew even more irritated remembering that Aint had spoken that way about them. Then, when he opened his eyes back to reality, he saw Luina asking if he was okay since he had suddenly fainted. He got up saying everything was fine. The professors suggested he go to the infirmary, saying he might have overused his power. But Fernan could only think about the fact that Aint had started to see him as an enemy. He wondered why he had received another prophecy, especially one related to Luina. He imagined it might be showing something that would happen to him soon. If that was the case, then that demon from the prophecy named Andromalius, one of the 72 demons, would really appear in that world. The scene shifted to Hyde, who praised Fernan for getting first place in the test. Fernan, however, said he was very tired because he had used a lot of energy. Hyde suggested he get some rest. Even while riding in the carriage, Fernan couldn't stop thinking about Andromalius. He remembered it was one of the 72 demons, described as a man with black hair and black eyes, with a snake coiled around his right arm. No matter how much he researched in his books, that was all he could find about him. The war against the demons had taken place about 1,000 years earlier, so it was natural there were no detailed records left. Nowadays, the existence of demons was treated as a myth. 1,000 years ago, they had completely disappeared, defeated by the Emperor, and had never been seen again. Even so, Aint protected everyone from any threat. The problem, Fernan thought, was that Luina would get badly hurt in that battle. He kept wondering if he should tell her about it. Even if he did, would she believe him? He remembered trying to talk about it before, but she had asked if he was going crazy. When he asked if she believed in demons, she wanted to know why he was suddenly talking about that. He insisted that she answer whether she believed in demons or not, and she replied that of course she did, since the Empire had been founded after defeating many of them. Fernan asked if she thought demons still existed on Earth, and she fired back asking if he had hit his head during training. He concluded that she treated him like a lunatic. He thought that if he had concrete proof of a demon, he might be able to convince her. He remembered that exactly 1 month from now, during a training match for the first-year knights, Aint would defeat Varen, the second-best student. After that, no one at the academy would be able to match Aint. But despite the victory, the loser would lose much more because Varen would end up being possessed by a demon. That would be the moment the first demon appeared, and it was coming soon. He thought that if he managed to use that incident well, it might be easy to make people believe. There would be very clear evidence he could use as a basis to expand his plans. However, he didn't know exactly when or where the demon would take Varen's body, which frustrated him because he couldn't see that part of the prophecy. He wondered if it would become visible when the time came, or if he would need to meet some requirement to gain that vision. The scene then shifted to Aint, who was looking at the test results and recognized that Fernan Fellenberg had lived up to his name, still fighting alongside a Birchev. Aint Armian noted that thanks to the support of a Birchev, that show-off from the Pellenberg family hadn't embarrassed himself. But Gardner warned him not to compare those two families, saying the only knight who could stand beside him on the battlefield was the former emperor of the Birchev family. Even so, Aint commented that these days people valued the Pellenberg far more than the Birchev, and Gardner said that was exactly why the world had ended up the way it had. He remembered that during the war 1,000 years ago, it was thanks to the war fund that he himself had to partner with those upstarts. But then Gardner thought of something and suggested that Aint ask Fernan for money since their equipment was very worn out. He explained that the Pellenberg wanted to get close to Armian without declaring it directly. They built trust, made him lower his guard, and then trapped him completely. Gardner said his family was completely ruined and wondered what more they could want. He got even angrier and said the reasons didn't matter. Even so, Aint remembered that when he met Fernan had given him a potion when he was wounded by a monster, and his eyes hadn't been those of a cold or calculating person. He had really seemed worried, and Aint thought that asking for money from someone like that was dishonorable because trust wasn't something you could buy. Gardner complained, saying Aint was naive because even the former emperor had said having a rich supporter was reassuring. He reminded Aint that he had allied with the Pellenberg just because they had paid for him to have a meal. He added that Fernan would probably give him the money he needed, as if he had been expecting the request. Meanwhile, Aint Armian was talking with Hyde. Aint wanted to know why he couldn't meet Fernan at that moment. Hyde explained that the young master was managing a merchant guild alongside his studies and was very busy, making it hard to find time for meetings. Even so, Aint insisted he wasn't just any guest but an Armian, and asked Hyde to tell Fernan that again. Hyde confirmed he had already passed on that message, but Fernan had replied that he was too busy and asked him to come another time. Aint left thinking that Gardner had said he would get the money as expected, but in the end, he had only ended up bothering Fernan. Meanwhile, Fernan was reflecting on what had happened, finding it unexpected. He believed his trap hadn't been that tempting and hadn't expected Aint to come looking for him first. Then Hyde came in saying he had done what his master wanted and asked why, if Fernan was so interested in Aint Armian, he had sent him away. Fernan explained that it seemed very strange because many people approached the Pellenberg with ulterior motives. He believed Aint didn't do favors like that for others so easily and had the feeling the boy didn't really want to be there. Hyde asked if it was really necessary to go so far for someone from a fallen imperial family, but Fernan said that Aint had a lot of talent and would be a great help to him. That was why he asked Hyde to go to the family's main warehouses and get all the elixirs they had. Hyde warned him that those elixirs were very expensive and that giving them all away would mean a huge loss for them. Even so, Fernan replied that he would simply have to offer something even more valuable because there was nothing that couldn't be won with money. He told himself that if he couldn't get something, it was only because he hadn't offered enough money yet. The scene then shifted to Aint's residence, where Gardner asked what the Pellenberg butler had gone there to do. Aint explained that he had just delivered a box and a note before leaving. Gardner said it was surely a letter of apology, and that the boy seemed to have a sense of responsibility. When Aint opened the letter, he read that the elixir had been made exclusively for him. Upon opening the box, he was startled, which drew Gardner's attention, and he asked why Aint was so surprised. Inside the box was the heart of a holy bird, a sacred creature that had imbued its light into that ingredient. That elixir was perfect for the Armian sword style, since it dealt with the power of light. Gardner commented that even though they hadn't received any money, it had still been very good that he had gone to visit Fernan. At that moment, Aint began to cry, telling himself he couldn't believe Fernan valued someone as useless as him so much, and that he needed to work even harder to help him. The scene then shifted to Fernan, who asked what the result had been. Hyde explained that Aint had defeated Varen. Although Varen's sword was superior, Armian's aura was very impressive. Fernan thought the prophecy had already said he would win in a special way and wondered if the elixir he had given him had helped with the victory. He admitted that the elixir had probably had some effect, but Hyde remarked that it sounded like he was saying Aint would have won even without the potion. Fernan acknowledged that no one could know that for sure. Even so, he reflected that the prophecy said Varen would soon be possessed by a demon. For him, that would be the perfect opportunity to get proof of demon's existence. He then asked Hyde to keep an eye on Varen, because he wanted to find out where and how he would encounter that demon, and also understand how the demon would try to possess his body. Moreover, Fernan wondered how a demon that had disappeared 1,000 years ago could return to that world. He made it clear to Hyde that he needed to know absolutely everything about Varen. Soon after, Varen was seen swapping out his sword in town and then clutching his stomach and running to the bathroom. At another moment, he was training in the practice field and again grabbed his stomach before rushing off. 2 weeks passed since they had begun watching him, but unfortunately nothing had happened. Fernan lay in bed thinking that none of it made sense to him. He reflected that something important should already have happened and began to wonder if Hyde was even investigating properly, or if the part of the prophecy about Varen being possessed by a demon was false. He thought more carefully about it when he remembered that the report simply said Varen had a pooping syndrome, which made him even more suspicious. For Fernan, the most important part of the prophecy was precisely the demon's appearance. If that part was false, he would have to reconsider the reliability of the entire prophecy. He remembered it was written that after losing to Aint, Varen would grind his teeth in frustration and find an opportunity during the semester exams to attack Aint from behind. However, the winner of that fight would already be decided and, after a long battle, Aint would leave Varen lying defeated. It was exactly at that moment that a demonic energy would begin to possess Varen's body. At that moment, Fernan woke up startled, asking if it was already morning. He didn't even remember what time he had fallen asleep and realized he was now seeing parts of the prophecy while dreaming. Even so, he felt satisfied because he had managed to discover the exact moment when Varen would be possessed by that demon after losing to Aint during the midterm exams. And that exam was happening that day. Hyde entered the room saying the young master had woken up quite early and asking if he wanted breakfast. But Fernan was already getting ready to leave and said he was going to watch the midterm exam of the first-year Knights department. He said he needed an escort and asked Hyde to go with him. Hyde, however, explained that he had been summoned by the Duke's estate. Fernan said that was fine and that he would take someone else, but Hyde asked who he could possibly take since he didn't have any other friends. Fernan then answered to himself that he could call a friend he had basically bought with money. The scene shifted to Luina, who asked if he really needed an escort for an elixir mission. Fernan explained that the effect of the elixir would fade if they delayed any longer, and that was why he needed to go immediately. Luina said she was busy studying for her own exams, but Fernan offered to waive the Birchef debt interest for a few months after graduation if she went with him. Faced with that, she quickly agreed and asked where they were going. He explained it would be in the northern mountainous region, but Luina reminded him that place was being used as the midterm exam site for the freshmen. If they were caught there, they could be punished for breaking school rules. Fernan replied that there was nothing in the world money couldn't buy and said the supervising professor was very flexible, which was exactly why he liked him so much. Even so, Luina said she needed to return to the dormitory to get her sword. That annoyed Fernan, who asked how a knight could go back on her word, but she replied that she had simply forgotten to bring her weapon. Fernan then ordered her to get her sword as quickly as possible. After that, Fernan reflected that they would need to hide so they wouldn't be discovered by professors or assistants. He acknowledged that even bribing a few teachers, walking around openly there would be a big problem. Luina remarked that at least he was aware of the risk, but said that doing it knowingly was even worse. Fernan checked the map to plan their route and saw that Aint was currently in second place in the department, very close to Varen, who was in third. He wondered if the two had already encountered each other. Luina, seeing the map, asked if that wasn't the same model the teachers used, which would be against the rules for students to have. She wondered how much he had paid to bribe that teacher, but Fernan simply asked her to follow him in silence. Suddenly, Fernan had a bad feeling and Luina noticed a strange sound, asking if it wasn't the scream of a monster. That made Fernan very worried about what might be happening. Luina said they needed to check it out as quickly as possible and ran ahead, leaving Fernan behind. When she reached the spot, Luina saw that a boy was unconscious and seemed to have been attacked by a monster. Thanks to the defensive magic of the map he was holding, he hadn't been seriously injured. Even so, there was something very strange since the monsters in that area weren't usually aggressive. Fernan, seeing the scene, realized that everything had started much earlier than he expected and regretted not having been able to check Varen's condition beforehand. At that moment, the two of them ended up getting quite a scare. Suddenly, some monsters started running toward Luina and Fernan. Luina reacted quickly and cut one of their arms off with her sword, but was startled to see the monster keep advancing as if nothing had happened. She couldn't understand how it still had so much strength even after losing an arm. At that moment, Fernan used his earth magic to lift the monster off the ground and launch several stone spikes into its back. Luina jumped back to get away, and the monster ended up hitting its head on a tree. Fernan explained to Luina that the monster was in a berserk state and therefore didn't feel pain. He knew that creatures in this state attacked everything in sight and that the only way to defeat them was to cut off their heads. He also thought about the prophecy that mentioned monsters going berserk in several regions because of a demon. While the instructors were busy dealing with the unexpected anomaly, Fernan took advantage of the situation to attack Aint using the power he had received from a demon. During this fight against such a powerful enemy, Aint finally awakened to his true potential. Meanwhile, Fernan reflected on all of this, but Luina was very annoyed, trying to talk to him while he just laughed. Even so, he knew they first needed to defeat the monster that kept attacking them. The scene then shifted to Fernan, who was kneeling before Aint. Aint turned his back and started to walk away, making it clear he had no intention of continuing the fight. This destroyed Ferran's pride, and he wondered where Aint was going now that the duel hadn't finished. He felt humiliated realizing the fight was already decided and that he was the loser. Fernan thought about how he had disappointed Ludiger and his own father. He remembered even his father saying that his younger brother was much better than him. For him, losing meant risking his position as heir to the family. Full of rage, he decided he needed to defeat Aint at any cost and charged at him again, but once more he was easily defeated. After beating him again, Aint wondered why he was so stubborn. Even though he was so weak, Fernan couldn't accept defeat with dignity. To Aint, he was just a worm who would disgrace the honor of the knights if he kept living. That's why he decided to leave, saying he would just leave his body there for the instructors to find. Elsewhere, Luina was telling Fernan they should forget the elixir and get out of there as fast as possible to warn the instructors. But Fernan insisted he couldn't just give up on the elixir. He insisted they would push through that horde of monsters and head west. Luina started to think he had completely lost his mind. She wondered if maybe he had predicted something like this would happen, and that was why he wanted company. But Fernan denied it, saying there was no way to predict something so chaotic. For him, it didn't matter if she was right or wrong. When she asked if the elixir was more important than his life, he just smiled and said, of course the elixir was more important. Then he ran off without thinking twice, leaving Luina unable to believe he was that crazy. The scene changed again as they arrived at the place Fernan claimed the cursed elixir would be. He recognized the area but realized he seemed to have arrived too late since the fight with Aint had already ended. Luina noticed someone lying on the ground and, worried, tried to approach even as Fernan told her not to. She quickly realized it was Fernan, saying he was very strong and questioning who could have left him in that state. She wanted to help him up quickly, but Fernan insisted she stay away. Even so, Luina couldn't accept the idea of leaving someone unconscious there, since berserk monsters could appear at any moment. At that moment, Fernan got up with a strange expression. Luina had a bad feeling and immediately jumped back. She felt an intense aura unlike anything she had ever felt before. Fernan recognized it as demonic energy. Luina understood it was that black aura that only demons emitted. Fernan confirmed that Fernan had been possessed by a demon and thought about the prophecy, which said he was supposed to go after Aint once possessed. But at that moment, it seemed Ferran's target had changed. Luina understood the danger and realized that before anything else, they needed to subdue Fernan as quickly as possible. Fernan asked Luina to wait at least 10 minutes, but before she could even question him, he had already vanished. Meanwhile, Fernan, consumed by demonic energy, charged furiously at Luina. The two began fighting, and Luina quickly noticed he was much stronger than before. With few options, she tried to push him away and then jumped on him, delivering a powerful blow in an attempt to make him regain consciousness. However, Ferran's demonic power intensified even more, making him attack her with savage force. The battle between them turned violent and evenly matched, but Luina noticed her mana was running out quickly while Ferran's demonic energy seemed endless. Desperate, she wondered what she could do in that situation when Fernan reappeared, calling her name. Luina, frustrated and exhausted, stomped on Ferran's head to pin him down and turned to Fernan, furious that he had shown up out of nowhere and had abandoned her in the middle of the fight. Fernan calmly explained that he hadn't run away to save himself but to prepare a trap to subdue Fernan, since he knew it wouldn't be easy to restrain someone possessed by a demon. At the right moment, Fernan triggered Fernan's trap. His body was thrown into the air, and while he was still airborne, several fire darts struck him hard, slamming him violently back to the ground. Luina, panting, complained that he didn't need to go that far and asked what he would do if Fernan died right there. Fernan replied that she didn't need to worry because he wouldn't die that easily. In fact, that attack only seemed to make him even angrier. Fernan then admitted to himself that he didn't want to use his final resource, but he had no other choice. He channeled a fire attack so powerful that even Luina was surprised to see the flames hit Veron's head and burn his body, which fell to the ground immediately, motionless. Proud, Fernan told himself the operation had been a success. Luina, on the other hand, was outraged. She asked if those items used in the trap weren't really expensive and if it hadn't been a huge waste of money. Fernan replied that in that situation there was nothing else to be done. But Luina insisted that if they had worked together from the start, they could have defeated Veron without spending so much. Fernan, however, disagreed, explaining it wouldn't have worked anyway since Veron was possessed by a demon and wouldn't have given in easily. While Luina kept talking, Fernan was lost in thought. He found everything very strange because, according to the prophecy, the one who was supposed to fight the possessed Veron was Aint. But thinking it over, he realized that Aint, despite being the hero destined to save the world, was still just a first-year student who hadn't fully awakened his abilities. Compared to that, Luina, who was in the second year, was naturally stronger at the moment. Realizing this, Fernan became extremely irritated to conclude he had spent a fortune on magical items for nothing. He thought he had become so obsessed with the word demon that he forgot the most important thing, the cost of all those items used in the trap. But before he could keep reflecting, Veron, surprisingly, got up once more, even after everything, and charged at them again. Fernan, already stressed from having spent so much money, lost his temper and punched Veron straight in the face, knocking him out immediately. The scene then shifted to Veron himself, who seemed to be watching everything that had happened as if he were just a spectator. He couldn't believe that could really be him and felt something was very wrong. Fernan explained that the magical sphere had recorded exactly how everything happened, with no reason for lies or distortions. Veron, confused, said he didn't remember anything after fighting Aint. Fernan then patiently and directly told him that was why he was explaining everything. He said that after losing the fight with Aint, Veron was possessed by a demon and started attacking everyone around him. But Veron, bewildered, insisted he had never even met a demon in his life. Still confused, Veron asked how Fernan could be so sure he'd been possessed by a demon. Fernan explained with calculated coldness that Veron should know the reason very well. He had been hit directly by a powerful explosion, pierced by dozens of magical arrows, and burned by an intense column of fire. The simple fact he was alive after all that was proof that demonic energy had protected his body in a supernatural way. In addition, Fernan explained they had used several special artifacts to force the demon out of him. When Veron heard that, he asked if Fernan was talking about those expensive items used to nearly kill him and if he was now supposed to pay for them. At that moment, Fernan, with a dramatic and shameless air, started pretending to cry, saying he had suffered greatly too since he had endured immense mental trauma spending so much money to save Veron's life from a terrible demon. Veron, embarrassed, said he understood and asked what he could do to compensate him. Fernan, very practical, said it was something quite simple and handed him a contract. When Veron took the document and started reading, he was horrified to see it was a slavery contract. Fernan explained, without the slightest shame, that if he didn't want to accept those terms, there was no other choice but to resolve everything by normal rules, which would include showing the recording sphere to the Inquisitors. Fernan explained that the Inquisitors were an organization directly subordinate to the Emperor, and whose main goal was to find and eliminate demons. Since there hadn't been any record of demons for over 1,000 years, the Inquisitors had lost their relevance and were always looking for the perfect opportunity to regain power. Veron protested that he had nothing to do with demons, but Fernan kept explaining, saying that since he had been possessed by a demon, he would be expelled from the academy without any chance to defend himself. He also asked if Veron's father would even accept acknowledging a son who had been possessed by a demon. At that moment, Veron realized he had no way out. He lowered his head and agreed to sign the contract, declaring he would now be under the care of his master. Luina, who had watched everything, asked if that was really right and if it wouldn't be better to tell the teachers what had happened. Fernan, however, said they didn't have time for that anymore. He wanted to understand whether Veron had become a demon by choice or if he had been manipulated. Fernan reflected aloud that if Veron had been manipulated, it meant there was someone inside the academy working with demons. If this incident became public, the real culprits could hide more easily, making them even harder to find. Luina then asked why demons would choose to attack an academy student specifically. Fernan explained that, in his opinion, it was because the academy gathered the most promising talents in the entire empire. Destroying or corrupting those young people was the same as destroying the empire's future. Hearing this, Luina became very serious and declared he could always count on her to exterminate demons. Fernan, satisfied, thought that was perfect magic because that way he wouldn't need to offer anything in return for her help. The scene then shifted to the teachers and assistants trying to calm all the students after the incident with the rampaging monsters. The midterm exam for the first-year Knights department ended up being cancelled, but since they couldn't suspend the semester's evaluations completely, the practical exams were replaced with written tests. This was a problem for many students since the Academy's grades placed much more weight on practical skills than theoretical content. Because of that, the written exams became a burden for everyone, including Aint, who was no exception. Gardner, observing all the confusion, commented that no matter how much one thought about it, it was clear that the berserk monster was the work of a demon. He said he had felt a faint demonic energy in the area even though the demon itself hadn't appeared. Aint, still trying to understand, said that if the demon hadn't shown itself, maybe it wasn't its doing. But Gardner completely disagreed, saying that was impossible and that demons would certainly show up again. He explained that was exactly why the first emperor had placed him there, because he knew demons would always return to that world. Aint, curious and a little scared, asked why they would always come back. Gardner, serious, answered that for demons, the Armian surname was the most hated enemy, carved deeply into their very bones. Without the Armians, the demons would have the whole world in their hands. That's why it was obvious they would try to wipe out the entire Armian bloodline first. Aint, frustrated, began to wonder if he himself wasn't the trigger attracting demons to the world. At the same time, elsewhere in the Revito's hall, Fernan was so worried it felt like his head was about to explode. Hyde, noticing his state, asked what was wrong with him. Fernan had just had another of his visions of the future, in which he saw the first-year students having their survival skills tested by being sent to the southern forest for an entire week. In his vision, Aint was seen entering a mysterious cave. Inside, he encountered a gigantic spiritual beast. The prophecy also said that a thief was acting as if he were a master, something Fernan thought was too much to handle at that moment. In the vision, Aint was forced to flee, and because of that, a crack in the wall revealed mithril ore, known as the metal blessed by mana. In addition, Fernan noticed there was a sword made of that same metal. Thanks to this, someone's soul was bound to that blade. All of this left him confused. He wondered how a metal could house a soul, but that idea ended up giving him a plan. Without wasting time, Fernan went looking for Luina to talk to her. When he arrived, Luina greeted him by reminding him that last time he had said they needed a spiritual elixir and now he was talking about a spiritual herb. Fernan, unashamed, admitted that last time he had lied, but this time it was true. He explained that the first-year survival training would last an entire week. Luina shot back that this meant missing classes for a week, which was unacceptable. Fernan replied that he had already prepared a way to make up for the missed classes and that if she would just agree, he would take care of the rest. But Luina refused immediately, saying she wouldn't do that at all. He then tried to convince her by offering her a share of the Berchef interests, but again she refused, saying she wouldn't skip classes just for a spiritual herb. As they argued, a boy entered the room calling for Fernan. He had red hair and introduced himself as Jace Vines, saying it had been a long time since they'd seen each other. Jace politely greeted Luina and asked permission to sit down. They started talking, and Luina, curious, asked how they could be so close. Fernan noticed that Luina was surprised, and Jace commented that it was only natural. But Luina disagreed, saying there was nothing natural about it since Jace Vines was known as the saint of the Church of the Dragon God. She found it strange that such a respected saint would be involved with someone like Fernan, famous for his greed. Jace explained that she wouldn't fully understand because she wasn't a mage. The Church of the Dragon God used to worship the ancient dragon that granted magic to humanity. Over time, they began to worship not just the dragon but magic itself. Because of this, most of the church's followers were mages, and it had become a very powerful organization. For someone to become an archmage, they needed to be recognized by the Pope of the church, which showed the authority they had. Luina said she already knew all that but asked what it had to do with their friendship. Jace explained that since the church was made up of mages, there was an enormous flow of funding, and the Pellenbergs were the biggest supporters of the church. Countless magical items created by the church were sent to the Pellenberg Merchants Guild. That's why the Church of the Dragon God and the Pellenberg family were completely intertwined. Luina reflected on this and began to wonder if Jace was really that saintly. Noticing the tone of the question, Jace put on a sad expression and said that kind of comment really hurt. Luina then apologized, saying it had been a slip on her part, but now she understood their connection better. She stood up, saying she would leave them to talk alone. Jace asked why she was leaving so quickly since they had just met. Luina replied that she didn't intend to get more involved in those matters. Jace, smiling, said that if she changed her mind, she could come back anytime time she wanted. As soon as Luina left, Jace asked Fernan why he had called him. Fernan explained that he planned to collect spiritual herbs during the field survival training and needed some help for that. Jace found the proposal quite tempting. Fernan, suspicious, asked if he was thinking of keeping everything for himself, but Jace denied it, saying of course he wouldn't do that. Fernan didn't want to risk the relationship with the Pellenberg family just for a spiritual herb. Even so, he reflected on the need to collect it during training. With his skills, he could have sneaked in to get it easily, but admitted to himself he'd only do that if it was possible. Unfortunately, he still hadn't managed to pinpoint the exact location of the herb. He thought that, in theory, the information in the prophecy should be enough to locate it. It was said to be somewhere among the 7 lakes of the southern forest, where the freshmen's field training would take place. To try to find the exact spot, Fernan had been channeling mana into the bottom of all 7 lakes in recent days, hoping to find a mana vein that would reveal the entrance. But so far, he hadn't been successful. There was no sign of any mithril deposit. It was clear to him that the cave where the herb was hidden had been protected by magic in such a way that no ordinary method would allow it to be found. As annoying as it was, they would have to search the area on foot looking for clues. Jace pointed out that the students involved in the training wouldn't be allowed to move freely through the field area, which meant there would be lots of people around, making any attempt to sneak in much harder. Fernan, however, had a plan. He had registered as a teaching assistant for the freshmen's training. Although Jace found it strange, thinking the requirements for a second-year student to help would be stricter, Fernan explained that while it was unusual, it wasn't against the rules, and he had gotten permission without much trouble. Jace praised Fernan for his negotiation skills, recognizing that he was a very good merchant and that the plan really seemed excellent. After some thought, everyone agreed with the strategy. The story then shifted to the training field. Gardner asked Aint to review the plan one more time. The spiritual herb they were looking for was at Lake Fernan, and the goal was to make the collection seem like a coincidence so as not to raise suspicion. That's why, at first, the group was supposed to just wander around the area to disguise their intentions. At that moment, Aint noticed that Fernan was also there, apparently to help the freshmen. He supposed that Fernan was after the bonus points given to those who assisted students during training. Soon after, the teacher announced that the training would begin in 30 minutes and instructed everyone to take their positions. Aint felt a little disappointed because he had wanted to greet Fernan, but there wouldn't be time for that anymore. Meanwhile, Fernan had prepared a dummy dressed in clothes identical to his own. Jace was helping with the trick, casting a transformation spell on the dummy to make it take on Fernan's appearance. He was known as the best in the class at that kind of spell, and was proud of having used that magic for a long time to fool even authority figures like the Pope. Fernan was surprised by Jace's skill, but Jace explained that the Pope hadn't actually been completely fooled. Being a legendary mage, he had taken a few hours to realize the trick, but at first he wasn't sure what was happening. For Fernan, that was more than good enough for his purposes. He acknowledged that Jace was a true genius, able to confuse even the greatest mage in the world, and he thought Jace would be of great help in the future. Even so, something about it deeply intrigued him. There was no mention of Jace in the prophecy, which was strange. Jace was incredibly talented and also a member of the Church of the Dragon God, but even so, he didn't appear in any part of the prophetic visions. Fernan reflected that there were reasons for this. The Church of the Dragon God had always despised demons with particular intensity. In some memories and records, there was even a demon saying that the idea of magic belonging to dragons was a joke. For him, magic was purely a demonic power, something born from the demons themselves. That blasphemy had so angered the church that it had gone mad with the goal of exterminating all demons, turning almost into a cult obsessed with fighting these creatures. Fernan wondered whether Jace would prove to be a reliable ally or not in the future. While he was thinking about this, Jace was saying goodbye to a church brother, saying he would be back in up to 5 hours. Fernan just smiled, saying he was counting on him to keep the plan working. Soon after, Fernan began watching Aint's movements and noticed that he was heading west. The only lake in that direction was Lake Fernan, the most likely place to find the herb, so he decided it was time for Fernan to act. At that moment, Fernan appeared in front of Aint, ready to carry out the next step of the plan. Fernan was wondering if he really wanted to fight Aint again, since he was sure he wouldn't be able to beat him no matter how hard he tried. He knew well it was useless to keep insisting and felt pathetic for still holding on to that rivalry. Even so, Fernan had instructed Fernan to stay as close as possible to Aint during the practical training. Fernan didn't understand why Fernan wanted him to do that. For him, it didn't make sense. Fernan, on the other hand, considered that Fernan owed him his very life and therefore wasn't in a position to argue or refuse. Aint also seemed reluctant. He wondered if losing twice hadn't already been enough for the other to give up, but Fernan didn't care. To him, it didn't matter whether it was was 2 defeats or 100. He wasn't willing to give up his honor or his reputation. He planned to keep challenging Aint until he could recover and claim the respect he believed he deserved. Meanwhile, Gardner's spirit seemed amused by Varen's determination. He noted that even after being repeatedly defeated, Varen kept insisting on the challenge, showing genuine courage. To the spirit, he was beginning to show himself as a true knight, someone with enough honor to deserve respect. Aint reflected on this, even though he remembered that practical training prohibited fights between students. But Varen made it clear he didn't care about rules. For him, nothing mattered more than honor, and he wouldn't hesitate to break any rule to defend it. Gardner's spirit even supported that stance, saying it would be shameful for Aint to ignore the sincere desire of such a brave knight. Fernan, watching from a distance, just observed the situation unfold, satisfied to see his plan working. Even so, he needed to take care of other important matters. He went to the lake, checking to see if he was alone. He noticed that a magical barrier had been raised there, which would ensure privacy for his actions. He knew he could dig without fear that any noise would draw attention. Fernan wanted to try something new. He planned to use a specific magic he'd been curious to test for a long time. He needed to find the mithril before Aint got there, so he didn't have much time to waste. That's why he had prepared something special. He decided to summon his servant. Using magical technology principles, he combined complex techniques with huge amounts of mana and money. Thus, Fernan conjured a large golem. He looked at the newly summoned creature and said that from that moment on its name would be James. He then ordered it to start searching for mithril immediately. Meanwhile, Aint and Varen continued in the middle of training. Varen was grabbing Aint's legs, saying he couldn't defeat him. Aint, already out of patience, found it extremely irritating and mentally begged him to stop acting like a child. Varen remembered Fernan's words, who had instructed him to hold out for at least an hour to make the mission succeed, even if it was humiliating. He then told himself that he liked it, that he felt satisfied being humiliated and having his life ruined. That made Aint even angrier. He completely lost his patience and kicked Varen in the face, mentally calling him a freak for liking that. Even injured, Varen got up and admitted he really was a freak, but by then Aint had already vanished from in front of him. Varen, confused, quickly checked the time in his head. He remembered Fernan had told him to hold out for at least an hour, but when he checked, he realized an hour and 10 minutes had already passed. He then relaxed, relieved, realizing he had done his part. Technically, his mission had been a success. The scene then shifted to Aint, who was now entering a cave. Despite everything that had happened before, Gardner's spirit still questioned if he was really going to ignore the sincere request of an honorable knight like Varen. Aint justified to himself that the training rules prohibited fights between students, but at the same time he recognized that if he went looking for the cave alone, he'd probably never find it. Gardner reminded him that if it were easy to find, it would have been looted long ago. Even so, Aint sensed something strange there. He felt not only the presence of the spiritual herb, but also a different, more intense energy that made him suspicious about what he would really find in that cave. The spirit accompanying Aint asked him to look down. When Aint did so, he was impressed to see a rare and powerful flower growing there. He thought it was like winning the lottery, since finding it like that was extremely rare and valuable. Meanwhile, in the depths of the underwater cave, the golem Fernan had summoned worked happily. It was extracting a large amount of mithril, something Fernan had wanted for a long time. That result was better than he had expected. Back with Aint, he analyzed the situation carefully. Even though they had found the spiritual herb they were looking for, there was a huge problem. The plant was surrounded by a gigantic creature that seemed to be protecting it. The spirit accompanying him watched it with concern. He admitted he hadn't expected to find a sea dragon guarding the herb. For him, it would be better to come back later, at another opportunity, when they had a better chance of success. Aint wondered if it wouldn't be possible to simply fight the sea dragon to solve the problem right there. But the spirit explained that this would be extremely risky. If Aint tried to face it, he would give the sea dragon the opportunity to learn the taste of human flesh. He warned that the creature was far beyond Aint's abilities and that facing it was unthinkable at that moment. Suddenly, the situation became even more complicated. The cave began to shake violently. Some rocks fell from the ceiling onto the sleeping sea dragon, waking it up immediately. The spirit showed urgency, warning that this was really bad because the dragon was now fully awake and alert. Aint, frightened and completely unprepared for that, found himself face to face with the sea dragon and desperately wondered what he could do in such a terrible situation. If you're curious to know what happens next in this story, subscribe to the channel and leave 500 likes on this video to make sure part 2 comes out soon.